I think this is where my part starts. Hi, I'm Daniel Hommel. I live in Germany. My personal little pitch that I always give is that I help teams and organizations to reach their goals through better collaboration. Other people call that an Agile coach, which I am for about 10 years, been a Scrum Master before that a couple of years, developer, actually developed like extreme programming practices on a Scrum team, did that kind of stuff. And in recent years, I did also some coaching education, became like a certified coactive coach. I'm a CTC with Scrum Alliance, all that good stuff. And I think it was in 2015, I met Yasmina, the founder of Agile Humans, in Barcelona, and we had she showed me what Fidua is all about, which is a dish made out of noodles. We had a quite cool evening, and somehow she remembered me and invited me to be here, and I couldn't say no. And a topic that is currently that I spend a lot of my time on currently is leadership. I do a lot of leadership trainings inside companies, and I'm also reading about it, researching about it. And I wanted to give this opportunity to you to get a little bit of information from me, how my views about leadership are, and do something interactive. And my goal for today is, I personally think that leadership can be a little bit confusing. Maybe you have noticed that as well. It's kind of confusing, fluffy. There is not much really to hold on to. Everybody talks about it differently. It's a lot of opinion. And maybe I can clarify some of that. And then I want to help you understand that you are potentially already a leader, and maybe even a manager, and maybe we can figure that out a little bit.
Tak, ale on musi miesiąc postać.
Oh, I didn't understand that, but hello.
Ładny będzie.
Ja też musi postać, bo to jest tak.
To długo się celuje,
Okay.
tak?
No.
Somebody needs muting. Okay, we got that. So I'll just start with my presentation. Feel free to ask me any questions along the way. I hope it's not too nerdy. Pull together some of my notes, also the stuff I researched, and try to put some light on that fluffy concept of leadership and try to make it more concrete for you and more understandable. So, sharing my screen here. So leadership, and many people, especially the people who don't have an email signature that says manager, maybe ask themselves, hey, what's in it for me, right? Because I'm not a manager or not in a position of authority. Why should I consider leadership? Like, that's interesting. And this is what the goal of the session is, to help you to understand that, or to understand more, get more clarity on that. And if we talk about leadership, we should first ask ourselves, why all the fuss anyway? Like, why is that such an important topic? Why is everybody talking about it? And if we look at organizations, as they start, in the beginning, usually a couple of people come together. And as you can see on my slide, they are often people from a different background. They're not all the same shape, right? They form this new container, and they're looking into the future like, hey, we have a vision, an idea, let's solve this problem. And in the beginning, these companies are often, they don't even have a solution yet. They're probably not even profitable, but these people venture like into the unknown and start a company. This is usually how it starts. Then, once a company is successful, it usually looks a little bit like this. There's still those people on the top who initially started it. Now we call them the C-level. And they're still looking into the future. Hey, there is a cool new problem, but all the rest of the organization is organized a little bit differently, and they're also more people, and their message is heard more loudly, like, hey, let's exploit this solution. So apparently now, as the organization grows, the people on the top are still looking into the future, trying to make new things happen. But the rest of the organization suddenly is all about the status quo and creating stability and efficiency and exploiting the solution that is already there, making more money with what we already have. So there seems to be something like a trap of growth. So when organizations become successful and grow, like once you have a solution, you can sell it, finally you're making some money, you want to make more money, natural tendency, there seems to be the trap of putting too much focus when building the structure of your company on just scaling the current solution. Because you already have one, why would you need another one? Scale that solution. Structural focus on stability and efficiency, like keeping things as they are, making more efficient, more parts cheaper, right? Good for the customer, good for us. And depending on how you're funded as a company, might also be a lot of structural focus on the short-term shareholder value if you're part of the stock market. And on top of that, very often the reward systems, like how you get, how you climb up the ladder in the company, how you advance your career, or how you get better pay, is also tied to exactly those things. Making more money with the same solution, creating more stability, and so on. So, and if you think about these people who started it in the beginning, you probably, if you're anyone like me, you probably didn't think of them as managers. This is somehow naturally the kind of people that we think of as leaders. So maybe leadership has something to do with venturing out into the unknown, looking into the future, trying to make new things happen. And somehow when we think managers, we think of those other people that are about stability, about making things run more efficient and so on. There's a natural tendency, I think, to think that way. Of course, we will look into this in more detail. But what do we know so far? So leadership seems to be more future-oriented. Management seems to be more status quo-oriented. And organizations seem to become overly management-focused over time as they grow. Because once you have a solution for something, you want to exploit it, natural tendency. And if you don't pay attention, you might fall into this trap. And then if you're in that situation that we saw on the slide, then you're one of those companies that create that market for leadership development, because then the companies notice we have a lack of leadership. We need more of that progressive energy because markets are changing, things are changing. We focus too much on stability, so now we need leadership. So one question answered, where does all this leadership fuss come from? How did this leadership market even develop? I think that's probably the answer. And you will find some answers like that also with quite famous authors like John Kotter. Yeah. So what are the major narratives in this leadership market? And prepare for confusion, because I was very confused in the beginning. You could be confused as well. The major narratives, and somehow they seem to be all true at the same time. I can't believe it even. Like, leadership is not management. That is like, we haven't really defined what it is, but we're very clear. Leadership is not management. Usually goes hand in hand with leadership is good and management is bad. So, and somehow every Scrum Master thinks the person I work with is clearly a manager. That guy is bad. I don't like him. If we only had more leaders, everything would be good, right? So this is like the stuff that we hear and that we talk about. If we talk about leadership, then we often hear also a narrative that leadership, that's all about people leading people. Also quite famous books like Turning the Ship Around, which is talking about creating a leader-leader culture instead of a leader-follower culture. Still, it's kind of a people-to-people thing. People are leading people. There is a hint
Yeah, I
Laden.
would just like, do you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, everybody. I just like to add, because you reminded me of a practice in large corporations. I worked in one.
Yeah.
10 years ago, it was a custom to call the board, for example, management team.
Yeah.
And I noticed that maybe 5 years ago, at least here in Croatia, where I come from, it turned to leadership team. And no one speaks about management team anymore. It's all leadership.
Somehow we have decided leadership is all the rage now, and we all need to do leadership, and management is bad. I'm not so convinced that's actually the case, and I want to show this to you, but you're right. Yeah. Then other than leadership is about people leading people, there is a new story emerging, and you hear that a lot from the people in the Beta Codex community that has formed around people like Niels Pfleging and so on. You might have heard of them. They say leadership is about systems leading people. So stop talking about people leading people. We just need to make the systems the right way and the structure the right way. Then the system leads the people, so we can get rid of all the people-to-people leadership or management, or whatever is the right term here. That's at least the impression we get when we listen to the messages. Then there is leadership coaches and consultants and trainers who say, no, you need to focus on self-leadership. If you only focus on self-leadership and you get good at self-leadership, then automatically what happens is you become a good leader and people will follow you and everything will be good. Then there is the Kanban community and other communities who say like, wait, we need leadership on all levels. And somehow, how can this all be true at the same time? And how is this not confusing? What does this even actually mean? And my goal is to clear this up a little bit. So let's attack the big boy in the room first, right? Leadership is not management. Can we find any information about that? Where does this narrative come from? Seems to be widely agreed. So I digged into this and I found a paper from 1977 by Abraham Selesnik. And if you look at the paper, it seems to be pretty much an opinion piece. So it's opinion. It's not a scientific study. It's his opinion. And he proposes that managers and leaders are entirely different kinds of people. And this is cited quite often in other books, papers, and so on. And apparently, maybe he was not the first to say that. Maybe it was in the air at the time, right? But this is the first paper I could find that other papers also cited that contained this narrative. So apparently this guy publishing his opinion started this kind of leadership is not management. But we find other papers. And interestingly here, this is a paper from a medical journal that's also not too old, published just a few years ago. Lots of PhDs and doctor titles on there. And these people say leadership and management are one and the same. Interestingly, they also cite the paper from Selesnik, and they say, if you read the abstract, does segregating these important characteristics based upon arbitrary distinctions do more harm than good? So what they're proposing here is that leadership and management are somehow inseparable, and trying to completely separate them is probably harmful. Interesting. And I think they have a very clever point. And I have more to back this up. So this is actually from the paper. So they cite a few other sources, and they draw this picture with the two circles. So what they're basically saying is that leading and managing, you can think of them as looking at the same elephant from different directions. So if you look at it from one direction, you see the trunk, so you can focus on the trunk more, and from the other direction, you maybe see the legs. But if you just had the leg, nobody would say that's an elephant, because that's just the leg. So it's kind of together, but you can in there find different positions, and there is also a space where it's just unclear where it overlaps. And they summarize that apparently leading is more about who you are, and managing is more about how you make use of resources, and that you need both. And in the space where this overlaps, it's about like being an optimistic person, being decisive, and like making decisions, integrity, communication. And they have this table where they compare things, like what is more management and what is more leadership. And there is a couple of interesting things going on. So apparently leadership is more about people, and management is more about things. Leadership is about articulating a vision, about trust, about creating new change and using influence. So here I can see the person having a vision. Hey guys, let's sail into this direction, right? Let's find a new sea to fish, like whatever. This is like the person inviting others on a journey. And on the other side, what's really interesting, the leader is about creating the change, but making the change work, making the change stable and effective is on the management side. So if you manage change, maybe you're a Scrum Master, and I think Scrum Masters manage change. So somehow you're also a manager. Interestingly, management is more about authority, and leading is more about using the relationships. Is more like a social way of doing things. And if you look at strategy, the leader is, or leading is more about thinking strategically, but then putting the thought up strategy into goals and breaking it down and making it, like putting it into day-to-day action. That's management. And here you can brilliantly see you need both. Otherwise you're stuck. It's kind of cool. So what was it historically? At some point I was like, hey, what's another angle how I can look at this? And I came up with the idea to just Google for etymology of different words. Etymology is the science of, like, what is the root of a word? Where does it come from? How has it emerged over time? And maybe even how has its meaning changed over time? And I looked into this a little bit, and I found a cool paper from a leadership conference where somebody looked into the history of the word leadership. And it seems to go back, like the roots of the word seem to go back like to the year 800. And it has many parallels with words like fellowship, headship, partnership, statesmanship, all kinds of stuff. What's very interesting, and we will see this again, it's very related to horsemanship. Like leadership comes from horsemanship somehow. And in this paper is not only this timeline, there is also this table with different meanings. What I find very interesting is especially like the later meaning of the word leadership, which is like the foremost or most eminent member of a profession. So this does not talk about authority, but it's the most senior guy. It's like the most experienced guy that is seen as having leadership capacity. Then there is other meanings, which reminds me a little bit also of church and stuff, like the dignity of a position and so on. That's pretty interesting. So apparently this is also leadership. Apparently, if you look into the history of the word, and that's what they said in this other paper as well. It's about who you are. It's about you being a role model, combined with this other capacity of being able to look into the future, to come up with new visions, to invite people on a journey. So you're the guy in the front leading the pack. And who is in the front? It's probably the most trusted guy. So there is this cool etymology website. I think it's always the first result on Google if you Google etymology, some word. And here you can see leader, the one who leads, the one first or most prominent, again, like role model. And then if we add ship to the word, it turns it into the quality, the ability to, the condition. So if we talk about leadership, we actually talk about the competencies or ability to lead. And we can summarize here, leader is a role model. The leader guides or conducts. And the ship ending makes it more about the competencies to do so. So when we talk about leadership, we talk about the set of competencies, or like what makes a person to be a leader. So let's look also at manager, where this comes from. And this is really interesting because, again, we see like apparently horses were pretty important at some point in history, and we see that also here. So leadership comes from the word manage, and also like maneggiare, which is like leading a horse by hand, like when you train the horse or so. And of course, the word manure, like the thing that comes out the back end of the horse, right? That is also like the same root of the word. They didn't put that word here, but that's actually the same word. So apparently, leadership is more like horsemanship, where you take the horse on a journey, where you do something future-oriented, you venture out into the unknown, and to manage to be a manager, to do management means to create stability, and in terms of horses, to feed and train them and keep them clean and so on, like housekeeping, right? And again, you need both. How can you take your horse on a journey if there is not the housekeeping aspect, right? The horse needs to be fed, it needs to be cleaned. You need both. Interestingly, however, if you look at the words, manager seems to be more someone who handles things, does training, directs, like makes detailed decisions. And it's a lot about control, and also control through authority. So here, management is more about formal authority and also attention to detail. Now it starts to make more sense, right? And here is a very interesting other thing. The next aspect alone, I could probably talk 2 days about. I could make out of the book that I'm now pulling a concept out of, I could probably make a 2-day workshop out of this. So excuse me when I don't explain every detail, but this is a really cool book. You should definitely read it. What does psychology say about leadership, management, authority, all that stuff? There is a really cool book by Julie Diamond, who has a PhD in psychology, and she's basically describing some of her research in the book. And the book is called Power, a User's Guide. And what the book tries to do is not only explain power, like how does power work, it does specifically go into how does abuse of power, corruption, and so on come about. How does that happen? And she has a pretty interesting way to look at it, because she looks through it at it through the lens of a criminalist. She says, in order for something bad to happen, like corruption of power, there needs to be means, there needs to be an opportunity, and there needs to be a personal motive. Like this is literally like the CSI shows, like the detective work that you see on TV. And what does psychology say about this? The means are, this is what happens when you're put in a position of authority. And this has been studied by psychologists quite thoroughly. If you're put in authority, then your empathy diminishes. That can actually literally be measured in your brain. Your mirror neurons fire less if you're in a position where you feel power, where you're in authority. And why is that? Because looking at evolution, if you're in authority in terms of evolution, you need to care less about other people. It's waste, you know, like you're wasting calories thinking about people. You're in power. Why do you care? Another psychological effect is that you have more illusion of control. So you think you can control more than you can actually control. That happens when you're put in authority. And this inhibition is you feel less exposed to the rules of the social circle around you. And this is something you probably notice. Have you ever noticed that in some companies, it's always the managers, the leaders, the people with authority who are late to the meetings? And the people who are least, who really don't care, pulling out their notebook, doing their emails in the meeting and so on, like stuff that other people don't dare to do. This is what this inhibition is about. They feel less exposed to those rules and they don't even notice probably if they're breaking them. And you can't blame them. Of course, you can blame them to a certain degree, but all of us experience this effect when we are put into authority. It has been studied, it has been demonstrated. There is a real effect. And this is, you can see this as a danger and as an opportunity. Like it has two sides. That's also why you need to manage it. Because you feel less exposed to the social rules around you, because you feel like you have more control than you do, and before you feel less empathy for other people in that position, you're really well equipped to make difficult decisions. That's kind of helpful for a manager. On the other hand, if you overdo it or if you don't manage it, that can derail the other end. So it's kind of a tool. It's like a two-sided sword, right? Like if you're not careful, you can cut yourself as well. And that interacts with the other side, which is like the social aspect of power. If you're really smart about something, you will have a higher rank, especially in a context where this topic is important. Like if Mladen knows Java really well, and everybody knows that Mladen knows Java really well, he will, if in a team that is about Java development, probably have a higher rank than me. I have no clue about Java. So there is a social aspect. And the social form of power is more dynamic. It's dependent on who is around you. It's dependent on what topic is currently important and so on. So it's less stable than the authority one. And it's more about also your network, your relationships, and so on. And now they interact. If you just use authority without having the social backing, you will be seen as a bad leader. You need the social aspect in terms of people seeing you as a good leader when you use authority. And it interacts in another way as well, because if people know you're in authority, they will read you differently. You enter a social gathering, you display yourself in a certain way, and they will say, "Ah, of course, it's our boss, right? He's always like that. He's a good guy." So there's a self-fulfilling prophecy to it. And on the other hand, and that probably reminds you again of those guys coming late to the meeting because they're the manager and they don't even know this. Did you give them feedback? Probably not. I didn't. So once you're in authority, people give you less feedback because there is a dependency in the relationship. So you need to be aware, once you're in authority, you will receive less honest feedback. You need to work around that somehow. Otherwise, you will fly without, seeing where you go. You will be blinded. And then there is another difficulty with the social aspect. Like if you're in authority and you have a higher rank in the social groups that you navigate, like in all aspects of your life, if you never experience like a low rank situation, that might influence you negatively as well, because you feel you lose the connection to the people who are not in power. So it's always a good idea to have one role in your life where you're the small person, just to remind yourself, right? And this all rests on what they say the motive. So the theory here is you have the means, you have the big the big tool, that you can use. And maybe the social setting is the opportunity to use it, but that's not how a crime happens. There needs to be a personal motive. And the book really explains, well, abuse of power, almost like everybody thinks like these are psychopaths or sociopaths who do that. But it only explains a really small number of cases. Most people who abuse power are well-meaning people with great intentions. And they didn't manage their personal area well. So the more authority you have and the more you are in power, the more you need to manage your feelings, your emotions, your personal history, and so on, because all of that might give you a tendency to abuse power. If you have a personal history like childhood or whatever, how it came about, but you have a tendency to feel small, to feel weak. But on paper, you're like the big guy in the organization. You have the big stick, you can hit people. If you feel back against the wall, but you have the big stick, you have a tendency to lash out, right? You need to manage your personal aspects. And why is this so cool? Right? How does this tie back into what I said before? I think you can see it like this. As we said, the means, this is like coming from authority, and we already noticed that management is more about authority. So maybe authority is more what's going on the left. That doesn't fit perfectly, but yeah. The social aspect is more about leadership. Like here we have the network, we have trust, we have the role model aspect, being the best guy in a certain topic or whatever. And we noticed, at least how Julie Diamond's presented, these things need to be in balance. And they sit on the personal motive. And this is where this self-leadership talk comes in, right? Because if we look at what these self-leadership folks talk about, they talk about the responsibility process by Christopher Avery, which is about how you feel about stuff, managing your upsets. It's all about yourself, about your own emotions, feeling towards things that didn't work out as they should. Then you have people talk about, for instance, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, same camp of tools. Also fits here, in my opinion. Then the Stoics of Rome, like Seneca and Marcus Aurelius and all those folks, this whole Stoic philosophy fits here as well. Maybe you do some journaling to, challenge your own thoughts. That would also go in that camp. And if you believe what Julie Diamond says, this is really important. So you need to have some self-leadership in place in order to master the psychosocial dynamics of power, which is an interplay of that authority and social aspect of power, which I hear titled with the question mark management and leadership as well. So in order to masterfully manage or handle these dynamics, you need to sit on a stable foundation. And this is where your own self-management, self-organization, self-leadership comes in. So suddenly a lot of the narratives from the beginning make way more sense, in my opinion. Let's summarize this a little bit, right? So I made this stupid model. I actually did this slide this morning, so I'm not sure if it's perfect, but I just tried to map some words, right? So leadership is more about the future, where management is more about the now. Leadership is more about role modeling, while management is more about the authority. Leadership, it's more about having a dialogue and guiding. Of course, you're bringing in your opinion, but you're not like, this is the way we go, like you want to hear other people's opinion. And management is more about deciding. Leadership, big picture, then management, probably more details. It's more about controlling things, direction, like in terms of being the director and directing things. It's more about the style of conversation is more transactional, while on the leadership side, it's probably more a transformational conversation style. This is also why I put some tools here or some skills here. I think tools or skills like storytelling, coaching, facilitation is skills that I would put more into the leadership camp, because this is transformational conversation where you come up with visions, you create a new future, you figure out how to address it, you invite people on a journey. This is more leadership skills to me. And this seems to be more about doing the right thing. And we can also say it's more about the systemic perspective, because it's more about relationships and networks and how trust works in them and so on. And management is more about doing things right, and more about the tools here would be more about like setting detailed goals, measuring them, having budgets and stuff. It's more local, while leadership is more like big picture. And it all sits on the foundation of these personal aspects where the self, I'm not even sure if I would prefer the term self-leadership. I somehow prefer the term self-management. So personal aspects is where for me self-management lives. And some tools you might consider. You can start with a personality type thing. And if you don't like Myers-Briggs, which I don't, you might want to look into one that has more scientific backup, for at least right now. For instance, the Big Five test, or sometimes called Ocean. And if you have a higher tendency, for instance, for neuroticism on that test, which is the tendency to have bad feelings, maybe that needs to be something that you address in your self-management. However, if you're high in extroversion, so you're an outgoing person, and you're high in openness, maybe that's a good setup where leadership comes more natural to you than management. But if you want to be also good at management, maybe you need to put something in your self-management practices that helps you, work on those areas where you need some support, where you're not so good naturally. And the other way around, like if you're high on conscientiousness and industriousness and low on openness, maybe you're more a really good manager. You're really, down in the nitty-gritty, into the details, the metrics, creating stability for everyone. And so maybe that's your natural tendency, but maybe you then have a lack of leadership, of this leadership aspect, if you don't do something about it. And all of these practices, like the whole camp of Stoicism tools and responsibility process and 7 habits of highly effective people and all the stuff that you could pull out of your head is really about self-management. And once you have found the right practices to set you up in a way that helps you, to feel like you're accomplishing all the things you want to accomplish, then you can also see how that is the foundation for the other ones. Yeah, let's look back at the narratives. I think we have debunked the leadership is not management thing. Like, it's not exactly the same thing, but it's related. It's even kind of tied together. And there is even a space where it's really hard to set aside what is what. And it goes together. You can't just be a leader or a manager. You need to be both. Leadership is good, management is bad. We need managers. If we just had like the progressive types and not the people who created stability, it would be a mess, right? Some companies still have that leadership lack, which created apparently this market, but yeah, you need both. Leadership is not all about leading people. It certainly is somewhat about leading people. It's also somewhat about leading systems, leading people, which seems to be more like of a thing that is somewhat new, currently emerging, but we also find that more and more in literature. Julie Diamond also talks about that one good practice is to see your role as a role that belongs to the system and is not about you personally. Sets you up in a different way. So you find this more and more in literature, this systemic ideas, different kinds of ideas. So that's also true. It's not all about those. And leadership is also about self-leadership or self-management, but it's not the only perspective. You need all of those. And then we need leadership on all levels. It's not yet really addressed, but here comes the kicker. Your role probably has all those aspects, especially if you're working in an agile organization. So we probably have leadership on all levels in an agile organization. And by looking at your role, whatever your role is, and figuring out, oh, I have a management aspect, I have a leadership aspect, and figuring out where you can probably even strengthen them, gives us more leadership on all levels, right? And maybe you already have an idea, so where your leadership aspect or your management aspect could be. I definitely think you have both. And my idea is to jump into a more interactive part, if you're up for that. If not, we can also do this together, like all in a big group. I personally don't mind. But I prepared some mapping tool. I'm going to show you that in a second. Just let me look at the chat. Yeah, right. That's totally right. Yeah. So, and that's one of the things that Julie Diamond talks about. If you want to know more about that stuff, get that book, Power: A User's Guide by Julie Diamond. It's a brilliant book. I could build a 2-day-long course out of it. Like, there is a lot of good stuff also about the, she has a really cool idea for this personal aspects territory. She calls it figuring out your personal power print, like a personal fingerprint. And she has an exercise in the book where she runs you through a couple of questions, and it's really going deep, like what was your upbringing as a child? What's your health history? What's like all that kind of stuff? And we'll think through how that tilts you more in one or more in the other direction in terms of having some strengths or having some weaknesses that you can consciously use or consciously manage. It's a really, really cool thing. And many people that you describe here that people that ruin people, that is a sign of abuse of power. So they didn't read Julie Diamond's book. Yeah. So let's go to the mapping. I'm going to finish the slide deck. It's not very interesting. This is just about the company and what we do. This is me. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. Absolutely invite you to, or follow me on Twitter while Twitter is still around. Might not be long. Yeah. Obviously, success has many facets, and many of them can be considered extremely successful on some, yet successful or even unsuccessful on others. Yeah. I think it's always in the eye of the beholder. Like, if you're a manager and your people think you're treating them wrong, in some aspect, they're probably right. You probably forgot to manage one aspect, or you had some unconscious bias, or and this is also why this self-management aspect is so important, and why potentially, if you're in authority, if you're a manager, potentially you should just also work with a coach, a personal coach who helps you with that. I think that's a good practice. So that's the end of the presentation. So how are we doing so far? Is everyone sleeping already, or was it interesting enough to keep you awake?
Or drinking.
Yeah, you're drinking. That's good. Me too. I'm just drinking a Coke. So let me present you my idea, and then we decide if we do it in groups or together, or we can just discuss about it and then end it here, however you prefer, really. So I prepared a Miro board, and I can drop the link in the chat in a second. I pulled out this little summary as a little guideline. That's actually also why I put the slide together this morning. And my idea was that we split into groups of 3 and pick a random role, and deliberately not a management role. Like, let's pick a senior developer or a UX person or a tester or a HR person, and look at this role through these lenses. And I put here a third thing like execution or implementation, because I think each role, especially if it's not just a pure management position, has some aspects that are just your to-dos. That's just stuff you do as like what defines the role. But I believe, like all the roles I did this with, you have something where you're responsible for creating stability, for taking care of the status quo, for making things more effective, maybe even some metrics and some detailed decisions, maybe even some form of authority. And there is probably a leadership aspect, an aspect where you need to be more of a social person. You need to build your network, where also storytelling and coming up with cool visions and so on is more important, and where you're more concerned with venturing out in the unknown future. Like, let's say you're a tech person, that could be watching the market, watching emerging trends, starting the discussions in your company, like, hey, there is this new technology coming up. What does that mean for us? And creating a story for that and inviting people on a trip. And maybe at some point that switches over into that aspect that you're managing or that you're even doing. But I think for a tech person, leadership can be about technological trends that are emerging or somehow affecting the company that we need to do something about. And then you need to go talk to people, facilitate conversations. You're inviting them to a new ride, basically, which is leadership. And if you're a role model in your job, which also is in the leadership aspect, right, they will probably listen to you. So I think we can do this for product owners, scrum masters, whatever. And are you up for doing it in groups, or do you want to do like 1 or 2 roles together?
There's not many of us here. So
okay,
we could do it together.
Okay, yeah. Maybe that's also easier technology-wise. Then I can be the secretary of the people and write on the board, and you just have to talk. And you have your hands free for drinking. That's, I think, a feature of this event. Okay, so who wants to propose a role that we look into?
You were suggesting Scrum Master. I don't know. Is it an idea?
We can do that. I think that's pretty interesting. I was thinking like I would find it cool if people took like a developer or something, because usually we don't think of developers as managing or leading, but they do. Especially if you think of a senior developer or so. How do you become a senior? Because you're a leader, right? So that's pretty interesting. So you probably are more of a leader than you think. And that was my promise, right? So, but let's do Scrum Master then. And you can use the same structure for other experiments and look into things. Scrum Master. So what's the purpose of a Scrum Master? I don't know. We can skip this field. So what's the first thing that comes to mind? We can go really random, jump back and forth. If you think of a Scrum Master, what's the first thing that you would put in one of those fields?
For instance, something like good spirit in leadership aspect.
A good spirit, like bringing like positive vibes.
Yeah. I don't think that Scrum Master needs to be a cheerleader, but he or she needs to somehow be at least aware of how spirited he or she is, because it has an impact on the rest of the team.
Yeah. And that leads me to put something into the self-management or self-leadership category, because if you want to be consciously the good spirit of a team, you need to manage your energy and be aware of your bad days and pull yourself, out out of the negativity some days maybe. So there is emotional self-management. So we already have something in leadership and something in self-management or self-leadership. What else do we have?
Mm.
Come on, be courageous. There is no, we will figure this out together. There's no way to be wrong here.
How to say in one word, like somebody who pay attention to deadlines and who push people to like do things on the time.
Yeah, I personally, my preferred style.
It's like detailed oriented, maybe.
Yeah. I would say remind people of deadlines. That's just a wording thing, maybe, but and maybe my personal preference. I don't want to push people. I think you know, if they're motivated, they do it. But it doesn't matter. But remind people of deadlines. That means you're aware of the deadlines. You're controlling them. You're controlling the progress. You're aware of this. You're reminding people. That is certainly kind of a management activity. There's way more management activities, I think.
Candace suggested something in the chat.
Oh, yeah. I need to look at the chat now. Brings people together, right? No worries, Candace. That's okay. Brings people together, like what? Like team building. Like, yeah, this is clearly relationship oriented, right? I would put this somehow here, like bring people together. You do this. You don't do this by authority. You do this. You do this through the rank of that you have in the group, through the trust that people give you, through the networking, through conversations. I think that's a leadership activity.
Yeah, it shows how sometimes it's difficult to differentiate, I guess.
Yeah, and some things you could put in both camps.
Yeah, because you can bring people together by structure. I mean, not imposing the structure, but somehow following it.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one, because I believe I would put like the systemic view, like taking a bird's eye view, looking at the system, like, you know, taking really big step back and looking at it from the outside and looking what's happening, like this systemic awareness. I would put that into leadership, but then changing the system based on those insights and kind of changing it in a way that people automatically go the right way, like how the system moves them. That would then be a management task. And here you can see you need both aspects to do one job. So systemic awareness and reasoning about this would put this more here, but then adapting the system and maybe even measuring that somehow, or like here we are back down in the details and also controlling and so on.
Maybe expertise.
Like personal expertise in as what?
Not personal, maybe more like, yeah.
Expertise would, depending, like hypothetical story. Let's say the Scrum Master has at least some technical background. Might not be a developer, but at least knows the terms and can talk to the developers. that way, the personal expertise can certainly make it more easy for the developers to trust the person. And that's a really interesting one. I think that can be put in different camps. I think you can say personal expertise is kind of a role model thing and put it more in leadership, but I could also see in this case that it could be a self-management thing. Like you work with a new team, you're aware that you do not know much about their domain, and you're consciously reading up at least a little bit to put yourself in a position where you can talk to them better. Like reading up on the team's domain. Room for experimentation. Yeah, remember that slide where creating the change was leadership and managing the change was management. That I found really interesting. Makes room for experimentation, like coming up, like you know, cooking up the experiment, like asking people cool coaching questions and facilitating something to come up with an experiment. I would put in leadership. Then same like reminding people of deadlines, following up and like, hey folks, we decided on this. Did you already try it? How did it work out? Like, what were our metrics? That's management. So creating a new experiment. And yeah, and I put teaching in from the chat. I put teaching more in management, inspired by the horse story, like leading the horse on like by hand and training it is more management. Sometimes it's hard. It's not a clear distinction. It's more like a scale. Like this afternoon I thought about it this way, like, is room temperature hot or cold?
It's high or low.
Yeah, it's the same thing. You have a scale like hot and cold, and somewhere in between, like it's sometimes really hard to say, like, is room temperature,
okay.
is it hot or cold, right? And same thing here. So you have some things that are very clearly more in this camp, very clearly more in that camp. There's things that you, depending how you argue about them or what you're about the points you make, you could put them here or here.
Yeah, probably it depends on the content too, and the way you deliver the content.
Yeah, and here like prepare the retro or so, right? There's also stuff that you just need to do in that role. For a developer, that would be write code. Of course, you need to write code. That's not a management thing. However, keeping the dev server alive, like the continuous integration pipeline, and managing it and creating stability in that area would be, again, in my opinion, a management task. Yeah, facilitation. I would put that also here where coaching is. I think facilitation is clearly a relationship-oriented thing where you usually, you know, tap into the system, into the network of people, bring out all their opinions, kind of try to integrate it somehow. I think that's a leadership skill. Actually, I think coaching and facilitation is probably some of the clearest leadership skills I can see.
Yeah. Even though if we look at it from the process point of view, it could be management, because you're managing the process by facilitating. I mean, it's not the alternative. It's just the additional
I know
way
what
of
you
looking.
mean. Yeah, and there you're facilitating with a different role a little bit, right? Because there it's like it has this this aspect of also reminding people of the agreed upon rules. Like, hey, we agreed that we do Scrum, for examples, and now that would be the next step. Let's do it. Like, you also, if you manage the process, you also have a little bit this role, what I sometimes call the process police, right? And you're facilitating a little bit with that hat as well. It's a different kind of Adapting the system. Yeah, facilitating the process. With that reasoning, I can perfectly agree to put it in management. Make space for conflict. Yeah, I would say, like with the management kind of control and stability mindset, I would probably more like try to avoid conflict. I think make space for conflict goes probably well with coaching facilitation. Like allowing these things to emerge and then using the energy to move something forward. That's more like a creating change. More like a progressive thing. I would probably put that here.
Yeah. Do you agree, Candice?
If not, she has to speak up in the chat.
She just did.
Yeah. Okay, so yeah, and something that I find very helpful, and I mean, I don't call myself a Scrum Master anymore, and I very seldomly work with one team. I usually work with multiple teams and more like on the cross-team level, most of the time, department level or even organizational level. Still see myself kind of as a Scrum Master at the company level, so to say. And one of the practices I find very helpful from my early days as a Scrum Master up until now is, do you know this tool? I think in the retrospective book by Diana Larson and Esther Derby, it's called Circles and Soup. And I have seen it in different works where it's called Circles of Influence.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it maps, it's kind of Stoic philosophy, actually. Like focusing on the things you can influence, right? So that would be one tool, Circles and Soup, but you could actually just slap in Stoic philosophy in here, because as a Scrum Master, there's so much you could do. Very easy to, get confused or demotivated and so on. And then having a tool that helps you like, wait, what is like currently inside my circle of influence and what is the stuff that I can't even influence, because then I don't need to worry about it. Like where do I put my energy? This is about energy management. And this is also like responsibility process. Responsibility process is, are you aware of this responsibility process by Christopher Avery? It's becoming more and more famous, so it could well be. I am aware, that,
although I could not hold a lecture on it.
Cool. Yeah, it's a little bit about watching your own inner dialogue and getting out of what Christopher Avery calls like the control cycle. So the theory is that as long as like on these lower stages that you're somehow bound to go through every time, you're first not accepting any responsibility, like you're pushing it away, like that other person is responsible, or that it's their fault, right? Then the next step is it's the system's fault. You're still pushing it away, a little bit of a different narrative though. And then you start to accept it, but not in a responsible way, really. You say like, oh, I feel shameful because I made a mistake, and that doesn't help anyone, right? That's not responsible. If you think about it, not really a responsible behavior in terms of response, like in terms of responding, and there is the word response in responsibility. And then the next step is, I think, obligation, where you say like, okay, I don't really like it, but this is just how things are, and I just have to do it, right? It's still not like responsibility. And then after that, responsibility starts, and this is again a tool that I would put into this whole self-management camp, where you can hold a mirror up for yourself, for like, oh, I'm complaining too much again, right? Like I could also think about it more like this and actually do something about it. 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, one of my favorite books. I probably even like that more than the responsibility process. It's kind of it's kind of that and more, right? 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. A couple of really cool practices in there. Even like some things like journaling, right? Like just writing your morning pages. Like, how do I feel today? Am I afraid of something or anxious about something? How do I want to show up to this day? Like, you know, consciously. That can be a practice to put in here. Yeah, I think we got like the hang of this, right? Now we could fill it in for more. Of course, there's more stuff that Scrum Master just executes. Doesn't just prepare the retro. We could say this for a couple of more things, but
Each ceremony.
Yeah, dailies.
Yeah. So were you aware how much of a manager or leader the Scrum Master actually is?
I would say I was, but this helped somehow to structure this internal feeling that I understand.
Yeah, and some people say, yeah, the Scrum Master is a management role. I agree, but it's not only, right? It's also a leadership role.
Yeah.
And like in an Agile organization, this is how we get to this leadership on all levels. If we don't have a structure that prevents people from stepping into leadership and so on, they will, and then we get leadership on all levels. So
I would also say that this leadership is a tricky term. You reminded me with this etymology research you made. The similar thing I did. I don't know if you see this.
Yeah, I cannot really read it, but yeah.
I was coming up with words that were ending with ship. Championship, partnership, comradeship, friendship, and so on, to prove my point that it's not the right way to say our leadership decided something.
No,
because leadership is not a group of people. Leadership is trait or characteristic.
Yeah, it's the ability to lead. It's the competencies, the skills.
True.
So it's a bullshit sentence to say our leadership decided.
Exactly, but I don't know, do you experience that, or are you aware how often, how frequent such sentences are?
This is why
maybe depends of culture.
I don't know. I'm not working internationally, so maybe if
no, I hear this all the time, and you know, this is a little bit why I put this in the beginning with this, where I try to show to people how confusing all this is and how much fluff there is. It's all very fluffy, lots of platitudes, lots of strange words with not that much meaning. And you really have to, you know, take away the curtain and look at what things really mean if you want to make sense out of it. And I think leadership is a good example where, yeah, we as a society, even internationally, we built a habit of kind of using bullshit language in some areas and things that don't really mean much. They sound really fancy, but they don't mean much.
Yep.
Yeah. So I want to invite you to, I mean, this is really easy to steal, right? This is not like rocket science here. Maybe the part leading up to this was more interesting to figure out what these terms even mean, where they come from. I want to invite you to maybe let's not do this today because it gets too late, but do this for a technical role, like for a role where you in the first couple of seconds, you probably don't think of this role as a leadership role at all or as a management role at all. In my experiments, I could find these aspects in all roles if I thought of them like, sometimes I had to add the twist to think of them as a senior kind of role. But if you, for instance, a developer, if you have a developer who has no management aspect, doesn't manage like anything, that means they don't take care of, you know, the dev environment for the team. They're not involved in any metrics and so on. I'm not sure if that is really a good developer. So, and it also shows you, if I want to be more of a kind of a senior person in my trade, I might need to look into what aspects I need to strengthen. If I'd hire a developer, I would, and the story of the person would be like, oh no, I don't talk to other people. I'm a 10x developer. I basically just write code all day. Leave me alone with all the other stuff. I don't think of that person as a good developer, especially if I want a senior developer role, right? Because a senior developer for me supports the dev environment in which the other people who are not so senior work, and helps me keep that stable and keeps that going. And on top of that, a senior developer, I would expect to bring in strategic ideas, how to move forward regarding technology, which is leadership. So if you want to be a senior developer, in my opinion, you need to be a leader and a manager. And probably true for all other roles as well, at least in my opinion.
Yeah.
And how it works in holistic organization with a low level of management, like this map?
Yeah, I think what you, in a holistic organization, what you actually have is not a low level of management, you have a low level of authority.
Okay,
Because you delegated the authority to a process, right? Like if you have a sociocratic organization or a holacracy-based organization, what you do is you delegate the decision-making authority to a process that everyone follows. The authority is still there, it's not with the persons. But you still need to manage, you still need to keep things running, you still need to do all the housekeeping, look at the metrics, look at the budgets, that's all not gone. And I think in such organizations, if we go back to the slides that I showed, the stuff Julie Diamond writes about, being aware of your rank in the group, like a social rank. And that's a very dynamic thing, right? Because in topic A, maybe you're the expert and everyone trusts you. In topic B, everybody knows you have no clue. So while we talk about topic A, you have a high rank and the next second you have a low rank. So that's very dynamic. And I think in sociocratic organizations also that plays more of a role. You need to be aware of which topic to get involved in, and where your opinion carries more weight to navigate that space. Because otherwise you're just in a part of a sociocratic circle talking a lot and not influencing any opinions because nobody's listening to you. But if you're aware of when your voice matters and you can more consciously weigh in on things and also more consciously go to the places where you're needed, still very important. And in Julie Diamond's words, that's still a way of using power, not with formal authority, but it's power.
Using power.
Yeah, something fell down on the floor. I don't know what that even is.
And it's probably also connected with the trait of presence, or being able to somehow emanate this which people perceive as presence, as implicit authority. I sometimes feel that I lack presence. So I think I know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so I think presence, if you signal presence the way I understand it, that means like somehow what's coming up for me is I think of a person with high self-awareness and a person who can read the room well. And people see that that person can read the room because of the reaction to what's currently going on, to the tensions and so on. And you consider that person presence. And yeah, that's kind of a high skill, especially in the social setting, a high social skill. And I can totally see how that might immediately improve your rank in a group, because everybody can just feel like you're competent, not even in the topic, but just in like being in a group. And that's important as well. And you actually remind me of a talk by a psychologist I heard a couple of years ago, and he was also talking about ranking in groups, and like how some people use low rank behaviors without even noticing. Like, for instance, he said, like, if you're in a conversation with someone and you're constantly looking at your phone, like it might not even be, you know, that you feel pressured waiting for messages to come in and you don't have the privilege to just let them sit and wait. Might not even be that. You might just be addicted to your phone, but it can be read as a low rank thing. And there is other stuff that unconscious behaviors that can be read in a way that people perceive you of lower rank, even though you don't feel like that.
Yeah.
I think the more problematic thing for a Scrum Master, if you don't have formal authority and you want to, you know, get to a higher rank within the group in order to influence the group better, you might want to pay attention to such behaviors. I think the other thing that is more problematic is if you actually have authority and you feel weak. I think this is like the typical recipe for a bad boss. You know, the kind of boss that takes everything as an attack and then uses his authority to cover for that.
Scrum Master must help to their team, to all developers, to any employee, you know. I think that is the key word, helping people, help.
Yeah.
Because they are, I know, in our company, we have great developers, we have great people, they have experience, they're great, you know, but they need some help. Yes, to have some leader and to have some to manage their time, or to help them just to find out what they need to do in some projects, you know. So I think that help is the key word. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, I think facilitation and coaching and so on can be seen as a form of help. I mean, I would potentially want to add help them to help themselves. But
Yeah.
absolutely, right? So you want to help them figure out what they can agree on, what their goals are, what their next steps are. And in a way that the decisions come from them, but they probably need you to get there. And that form of help, I would put in the leadership category. And I see that very closely related to coaching skills, facilitation skills, the conflict stuff we talked about. I think a good headline for that is help.
Do you have a sense that now we reached the point of this concept, to mention the concept of servant leadership?
I think we already kind of did, right?
I didn't hear it, sorry.
Yeah, I didn't mention it, but I mentioned that some authors, you see that in Julie Diamond's book, You see that, for instance, in the book Systems Inspired Leadership, which is a book from the people who invented organizational relationship systems coaching, which is kind of a big word. One thing they say is that it creates a better dynamic if you see your role as a leader, especially when it's tied to authority, as something that belongs to the system, that's not for you because you're such a great guy. It's belong to the system. And if you think like that, and I think I had that in my slides, then you're automatically just inhabiting that role for a certain time. You're automatically more in a steward kind of mindset. And that is the core of servant leadership for me. It's a stewardship mindset. You're taking care of this for a while, keeping it in good shape to hand it over later. And it's not about you as a person and for you personally to benefit or as a you know, kind of pay for you or
I mean, when Jovana mentioned being of help and you added leadership at some point, you just reminded me of this servant leadership concept.
Yeah. So I think you can map these concepts into what we talked about, and they will probably also fall apart a little bit. Like you will probably need to add certain aspects to certain things into different camps somehow. Talking about servant leadership, there is also this concept of host leadership, because some people say, yeah, but host leadership is better because as a servant leader, you have no rights. A, I'm not sure about that. And B, if you see yourself as a host, like the host of a party, that sounds very much like authority to me, right? Yeah. So maybe, yeah, so you can do all kinds of interesting things with these. And I think what is really important is we need to be careful what words really mean. Be careful to use them in a meaningful way and not just use platitudes and buzzwords all the time. And then we can actually do something with them.
And be resilient towards the environment that doesn't have such an approach.
Yeah. Again, yeah, resilience. We're back to self-leadership.
Yep.
Because this is again resilience, everything that all the resilience practices I would put in there, right? Yeah, and as I said, my goal was to just challenge some of the narratives, maybe give a little bit of insight why I think leadership is such a big topic, why companies lack it so much, and how all these confusing narratives might make sense in the end, and how an integrated picture emerges. And I hope that was useful to you. I had a lot of fun putting this together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We did
And
too.
if you have more questions or
Yeah.
so, reach out to me on LinkedIn, write me an email or something. Yeah, what else can I offer? I don't know. If you have a question, reach out to me. We can have a virtual coffee or tea.